Good evening, I am Tomas Guevara, and this is the channel Rewriting the Reality. Our purpose is to help you accept your beliefs and expand your awareness. Subscribe to this channel to be informed of the advances in science and special about the nature of consciousness and our origin. This episode 40, I will tell you the story about Seth. It started on a September evening in 1963, when Jane Roberts sat down at her table to work on poetry, but her husband was in his backroom studio, painting. It was very domestic, very normal, very unpsychedelic, she would later remember. And then, between one normal minute and the next, a fantastic avalanche of radical, new ideas burst into my head with tremendous force. It was as if the physical world were really tissue paper thin, hiding infinite dimensions of reality, and I was flung through the tissue paper with a huge ripping sound. When she came to, Roberts found herself scrawling the title of this batch of notes, The Physical Universe as Idea Construction. Before this, though her fictional writings typically dealt with such themes as clairvoyance and reincarnation, intellectually neither she nor her husband Butts believed in extrasensory abilities. Yet soon after this episode, Roberts suddenly began recalling her dreams, including two that were precognitive. Their curiosity piqued, the couple decided to investigate further, and she managed to land a contract with a New York publisher for a do-it-yourself book on extrasensory perception. In late 1963, Roberts and Butts started experimenting with a Ouija board as part of Roberts' research for the book. According to Roberts and Butts, on December 2, 1963, they began to receive coherent messages from a male personality who eventually identified himself as Seth. Soon after, Roberts reported that she was hearing the messages in her head. The first 7 sessions were entirely with the Ouija board. The 3-hour session on the evening of January 2, 1964, was the first where she began to dictate the messages instead of using the Ouija board. For a while, she still opened her sessions with the board, but finally abandoned it after the 27th session on February 19, 1964. Roberts described the process of writing the Seth books as entering a trance state. She said Seth would assume control of her body and speak through her, while her husband wrote down the words she spoke. They referred to such episodes as readings or sessions. The 26th session on February 18, 1964, was the first held in the presence of another person, a friend. On January 17, 1964, Roberts channeled an allegedly recently deceased person who told Butts that his and his wife's work with Seth was a lifetime project, that they would publish his manuscripts and help spread his ideas. At the 27th session, Seth also told the couple how to rearrange the furniture in their apartment which would better suit their energies. Despite feelings of disbelief towards both messages, the couple somewhat reluctantly agreed. 2 days afterward, they heard from a psychologist interested in reincarnation to whom they had written 3 weeks earlier with some session copies enclosed. The psychologist told them that the very fluency of the material suggested that it might come from Robert's subconscious, though it was impossible to tell. He also cautioned that in some circumstances, amateur mediumship could lead to mental problems. My comment: most psychologists maintain this position until now. The letter upset her but helped her deal with her doubts. She felt there were no alarming changes in her personality. I was doing twice the creative work I had done earlier. I was satisfied with the quality of the Seth material, it was far superior to anything I could do on my own. If nothing else, I thought the sessions presented a way of making deeply unconscious knowledge available on a consistent basis. Because we were so innocent about psychic literature, we weren't hampered by superstitious fears about such psychic phenomena. I didn't believe in gods or demons, so I didn't fear them. I wanted to learn. Rob and I had discovered a whole new world together, and we were going to explore it. Roberts assumed Seth was a subconscious fantasy, personified because she did not believe in spirits or life after death. She monitored her personality characteristics and went to a psychologist. But she felt that Seth seemed far more mature and well-balanced than the psychologist, so finally I stopped worrying. This is not to say the experience did not cause certain strains and stresses that could accompany any worthwhile venture in an entirely new field. Roberts also purportedly channeled the worldviews of several other people, including the philosopher William James, Rembrandt, and the Impressionist painter Paul Cézanne, through a process she described as using a typewriter to write automatically. For 21 years until Roberts' death in 1984, with a one-year hiatus due to her final illness, Roberts held more than 1,500 regular or private ESP-class trance sessions in which she spoke on behalf of Seth, but served as the stenographer, taking the messages down in shorthand he had made up, having others on occasion make recording of some sessions. The messages from Seth channeled through Roberts consisted mostly of monologues on a wide variety of topics. They were published by Prentice Hall under the collective title Seth Material. Over the years, hundreds of people witnessed Roberts channeling Seth. Some went to the ESP classes Roberts held on Tuesdays and some Thursday nights, from September 1967 through February 1975 for an evening. Others attended for longer periods. By this time Jane had given up her gallery work and was teaching nursery school during part of this time. Outside of the ESP class structure, Roberts gave many personal Seth sessions to various individuals who had written to her, asking for help. She never charged for those sessions. However, at some point, she did charge $2.50 to $3.50 per ESP class of 5 to 40 people. When the books began to sell in sufficient numbers, she dropped that fee. Book sessions were almost always private, held on Monday and Wednesday evenings without witnesses from 1967 through 1982. The material through 1969 was published in summary form in the Seth Material, written by Roberts from the output of the channeling sessions. Beginning in January 1970, Roberts wrote books which she described as dictated by Seth. Roberts claimed no authorship of these books beyond her role as a medium. This series of Seth books totaled 10 volumes. The last 2 books appear to be incomplete due to Roberts' illness. Butts contributed extensive footnotes, appendices, and other comments to all the Seth books, and thus was a co-author on all of them. These editions described what was going on in Roberts and his life at the time of the various sessions, annotated in light of contemporary beliefs and materials he and Roberts were reading, described excerpts from some fan mail and letters from professionals commenting on Seth's material about their fields, and, especially later, provided insight as to the many steps of production of multiple books with the publisher. By February 1982, they were still receiving from 30 to 50 letters and packages a week from readers of their various books. Some of Roberts' earlier and later poetry was occasionally included to show how she had touched upon some of Seth's concepts. Roberts also wrote the Oversoul 7 trilogy to explore via fiction some of Seth's teachings on the concepts of reincarnation and oversouls. According to Roberts, Seth described himself as an energy personality essence no longer focused in physical matter, and was independent of Roberts' subconscious. Roberts initially expressed skepticism as to Seth's origins, wondering if he was a part of her own personality. While speaking as Seth, Roberts at times appeared stern, jovial, or professorial. His voice was deeper and more masculine-sounding than Jane's and was possessed of a distinct, although not identifiable, accent. Her house cats noticed the change. Unlike the psychic Edgar Cayce, whose syntax when speaking in trance was antiquated and convoluted, Robert's syntax and sentence structures were modern and clear when speaking as Seth. Later books continued to develop but did not contradict the material introduced in earlier works. Some practice elements were even included in how a few of the concepts could be practically experienced. A few contemporary world events were commented upon, such as the Jonestown, Guyana deaths and the 3 Mile Island accident. Seth also provided an alternative creation myth to that of the Big Bang or intelligent design. In early 1982, Roberts spent a month in the hospital for severely underactive thyroid gland, protruding eyes, and double vision, and almost total hearing loss, a slight anemia, budding bedsores, and a hospital-caused staph infection. She recovered to an extent, but died 2.5 years later in 1984, having been bedridden with severe arthritis, like her mother, for the final year and a half of her life. Roberts had spent 504 consecutive days in a hospital in Elmira, New York. The immediate causes of her death were a combination of protein depletion, osteomyelitis, and soft tissue infections. These conditions arose out of her long-standing rheumatoid arthritis. But it's believed for some 15 years that in Roberts' case, at least, the young girl's psychological conditioning was far more important, far more damaging, in those terms, than any physical tendency to inherit the disease. Roberts was cremated the next day in a process she and Butts had agreed upon several years earlier. After Roberts' death, recorded in The Way Toward Health in 1997, Butts continued his work as a guardian of the Seth texts and continued to supervise the publication of some of the remaining material, including the early sessions, making sure all of the recordings, manuscripts, notes, and drawings would be given to the Yale Library. Butts remarried, and his second wife, Laurel Lee Davies, supported his work during the more than 20 years they were together and helped answer mail and proofread manuscripts. Butts died of cancer on May 26, 2008. Jane Roberts Butts and Robert F. Butts Jr. are interred together in Wayne County, New York, Funestville Cemetery. However, there is another gravestone with their names on it in the Sunnyside Cemetery in Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania. Several groups have compiled anthologies of quotes from Seth, summarized sections of his teachings, issued copies of Seth sessions on audio tape, and further relayed the material via classes and conventions. Seth's effect upon New Age thinkers has been profound. The title jacket of The Nature of Personal Reality, a Seth book, republished in 1994, contains testimonials from some of the most notable thinkers and writers within the movement, like Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra, Shakti Gawain, Dan Millman, Louise Hay, Richard Bach. Others expressed the effect the Seth material had upon their own awakening. In words similar to Williamson's, they state, "Seth was one of my first metaphysical teachers. He remains a constant source of knowledge and inspiration in my life." Catherine L. Albanese, professor of religious history at the University of Chicago, stated that in the 1970s the Seth material launched an era of nationwide awareness of the channeling trend. She believes it contributed to the self-identity of an emergent New Age movement and also augmented its ranks. John P. Newport, in his study of the impact of New Age beliefs on contemporary culture, described the central focus of the Seth material as the idea that each individual create their own reality. Briefly summarized, our beliefs generate emotions that trigger our memories and organize our associations. Eventually, those beliefs become manifested in our physical lives and health. Newport wrote that this foundational concept of the New Age movement was first developed in the Seth material. Historian Robert C. Fuller, a professor of religious studies at Bradley University, wrote that Seth filled the role of guide for what Fuller called unchurched American spirituality, related to concepts of reincarnation, karma, free will, ancient metaphysical wisdom, and Christ consciousness. Some writers noted, husband Robert Butts stated that similarities exist between Seth's ideas and those of various religious, philosophical, and mystical doctrines from the Near, Middle, or Far East, and we've done a little reading on Buddhism, Hinduism, Zen, and Taoism, for example, not to mention subjects like shamanism, voodooism, and obeah. New Age writer Michael Talbot wrote, "To my great surprise, and slight annoyance, I found that Seth eloquently and lucidly articulated a view of reality that I had arrived at only after great effort and an extensive study of both paranormal phenomena and quantum physics." The Yale University Library Manuscripts and Archives maintains a collection entitled Jane Roberts Papers, which documents the career and personal life of Jane Roberts, including journals, poetry, correspondence, audio and video recordings, and other materials donated after her death by Roberts' husband and other individuals and organizations. Yale University's collection entitled Jane Roberts Papers occupies 164 linear feet of shelf space and is contained in 498 boxes. Jane Roberts's corpus advocates panpsychism and reality creation outside corporeal time. She advises scientists to look beyond evolution with the idea that the cells precognates, and she asks troubled people to cure themselves by believing that the point of power is in the present and beliefs create reality. In the late 1970s, when scientists considered viruses inert pests and unlife, Seth declared that viruses are necessary for life as we know it. Scientists have since discovered that much organic DNA has viral origins, and that healthy populations of symbiotic viruses maintain multicellular organisms via endogenosymbiosis. Roberts and the Seth material have attracted critiques from outside the paranormal community. The poet Charles Upton, in his collection of essays titled The System of Antichrist, posited that Roberts expanded the self due to a fear of death. His opinion was that the Seth texts are based on a misunderstanding of both Christianity and of Eastern religions. Professor of psychology and noted critic of parapsychology James E. Elcock said, "In light of all this, the Seth materials must surely be viewed as less than ordinary. There certainly was the time and talent for fraud to play a role, but we cannot discriminate between that possibility and the possibility of unconscious production. At any rate, given these circumstances, there seems little need to consider the involvement of any supernatural agency." Some religious groups have warned their members about the dangers and deceptions of reading channeled messages from Roberts and others. John MacArthur, host of a syndicated Christian talk show, considers the Seth material to be a book entirely written by a demon, while the New Age Urantia Foundation considers the book evidence for devil possession. The media claim that Seth was a demon from hell contacted through a Ouija board. Science writer Karen Stolzno has written that much of Roberts' work was criticized for being a ripoff of Christian and Eastern philosophy. It comes as no surprise that Seth influenced such authors as Deepak Chopra and Louise Hay. Since Roberts' death, others have claimed to channel Seth. In the introduction to Seth's first dictated book, Seth Speaks, he says, communications will come exclusively through Rupert, Seth's name for Jane, at all times, to protect the integrity of the material. In the Seth material, Jane Roberts wrote, "Several people have told me that Seth communicated with them through automatic writing, but Seth denies any such contacts. At least one person has claimed more recently to channel Roberts. I am giving you all this information because that is what motivated me to create this channel. Here I want to explain why Seth called Janet by the male name of Rupert. The differences between essences are their tone. This tone can be translated into a name. In my case, my tone has been translated into the name Fernando. I hope that this information call helps you understand where most of my knowledge comes from. The next episode will be about alternate selves. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel.